Once best known for its sun-kissed beaches and Mayan ruins, Mexico is now in the grip of a violent and relentless drug war. Since 2006, when the Mexican government unleashed squads of soldiers and police to combat the country's drug gangs, Mexico has lost over 50,000 lives, eclipsing even the casualty rates in Afghanistan. The causes of this often overlooked conflict are complex, but there is one striking truth. The lion's share of the United States' insatiable demand for drugs, whether cocaine or marijuana, is supplied via Mexico. America, in turn, supplies many of Mexico's guns. Due to this two-way traffic of guns and drugs, the 2,000-mile-long border separating Mexico and America, the busiest border in the world, has seen much of the violence, with the desert city of Ciudad Juarez, midway along the border, acting as a crucible. Ciudad Juarez briefly served as the Mexican capital a century ago, at the outset of the country's revolution. It has since mushroomed in size to over 2 million people, many of the newcomers arriving in the wake of the North American Free Trade Agreement in the mid-1990s between Canada, America, and Mexico. This treaty's favorable trading rules led to thousands of cheaply run American factories, known as maquiladoras, sprouting up over the border, and nowhere more than Juarez. Impoverished workers from all over Mexico and parts of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, flocked to Juarez to work in these new factories. The women would land jobs for a pittance. Over 80% of the maquiladora staff were women initially, while the men, at times unable to secure work in Juarez, were sucked into gangs. Often the children of such families were left neglected for long periods. Juarez, for all its border town flamboyance, was looking into the abyss. As America's demand for drugs increased, the gang leaders jockeyed for position along the border, including Chapo Guzman, Mexico's most brutal and wealthy narco, a regular on the Forbes magazine Most Powerful People in the World list. By the new millennium, the city had descended further into drug violence. Indeed, Juarez also became known for the feminicidio, a gruesome episode in which hundreds of young women, mostly blue-collar maquiladora workers far from home, were found murdered and violated around the city. Many of the killings remain unsolved, and several families are still fighting to find out the truth. Working conditions in some of the maquiladoras have since improved, but many have also closed down due to outsourcing of work to cheaper factories in countries such as China and India. Juarez, despite a recent dip in the murder rate, remains a very dangerous place, still riddled with drug addiction and widespread corruption, infecting not only the narcos, but at times the politicians, the army, and the police. And yet, amidst all the chaos and violence, there are some sure signs of hope. One such sign is the existence of Visión en Acción, a charity set up 17 years ago by Pastor José Antonio Galván to cater for the city's most vulnerable, the drug addicted, the homeless, the mentally ill. Out in the middle of the desert, 10 miles south of Juarez, Visión en Acción is a place that is both shocking and humbling. The pastor, a born-again preacher, describes his charity as a human junkyard, a place of lost souls that need recycling. But with all the surrounding violence in Juarez, he also sees it as an oasis of peace and love. Pastor Galván was himself once a drug addict and a gang member in Los Angeles, but finally cleaned himself up when he returned to Juarez back in the 1970s. He tells us that for a while he was living on the streets, a tramp. One day, in a drug-fueled rage, he attacked and hospitalized a street missionary. After this, he knew he had reached rock bottom and had to sort himself out. The pastor vowed to help people who were like his old self, those shunned by society. I feel deep love for my people, whatever they have done, the pastor tells us. Whether they're ex-killers, prostitutes, gang members, drug addicts, strippers, or just crazy as hell, They are all beautiful to me. He tries to reunite his lost souls with their families, but concedes many are too far gone. They will be with the charity for life. The medicine helps them, says the pastor, but not as much as the love.
I got 110 patients. My child, that's are my child, not my patient, my child. And that is a mental institution, especially for the person on the street, for the people who they lay down on the street like trash. Nobody want them except Jesus Christ. And
Galvan set up Vision en Action on a shoestring, starting with only a dozen patients. But now his family, as he describes them, has over 100 members. Some of them have been brought in by the families who cannot deal with them. Some have simply been found on the streets, or brought in by the border authorities or the police, such as 16-year-old Gustavo, who has just tried to kill his mother. The pastor tells Gustavo about his experiences as an addict and a gang member to help him relax and know that he is not alone, that others have suffered like him. Gustavo is put into a cell until he can be trusted.
The reason we have those cells is for self-protection. Yeah. And it's better for them. Sometimes they have to be behind bars. It's better that they get in a solid door, you know. So that way they can see it, they can feel the wind. The main thing on Vision en Acción is dignify the life of my people. We try to do the best. It sounds, you know, it looks very sad. A lot of people say, why bars? Why? Because we don't have not enough money to build a special. We're working on it. We're working on to do the best for these people. That's why we had a beautiful project. See, to start building better place to stay.
There are many different patients. Becky, who years ago, driven wild by drugs, killed someone, but is now one of Galvan's most helpful workers. Carlos, who was brought in by the police after several violent episodes on the street, and who now sings all day. And Josue Rosales.